gonna be almost impossible to not compare this show to The Office constantly.
Bing bong.
I was a big fan of The Office up until Steve Carell left the show. I watched every single episode when it aired. I rewatched them a bunch of times on Netflix and Peacock and all that. And, you know, I think I was always a little apprehensive about the idea of a reboot of the series or really any sort of continuation of The Office. I thought it had a pretty good ending, and it's really hard to end a TV show. And I think, you know, sometimes it's better to just let things lie and not revisit characters who were given, pretty much all given some sort of ending one way or another. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't excited or intrigued by the idea of the paper essentially taking the concept for The Office and just moving it to a different company, which I think in theory could work. I think that the concept for The Office is definitely something you could replicate like they did with Parks and Rec, which I'm pretty sure was from the same guy that did The Office, or at least he was involved. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Either way, I thought that concept could work in other areas. And so far, I think the paper is pretty good. It's definitely closer to Parks and Rec in terms of its style than The Office. It's definitely a bit of a combination of the two. I think it's not a one-for-one recreation of The Office. I think that's not quite what they're trying to do, at least not yet. And I say that because the dialogue around this show, in terms of the reviews and what a lot of people online have been saying about it, kind of makes me feel like there is potentially a larger population than I thought of people who never saw the first season of The Office, which was like not very good. First season of Parks and Rec was also so poorly received that they like scrapped the entire show and essentially just restarted from season 2, and then it became really popular and caught on. So I will say, look, being that that's already happened twice, it's a little disappointing to see it potentially happening again a third time with a very similar show, just in the sense that you think you kind of learned your lesson with the previous two shows, sort of have a more effective first season of the paper. But I will say, just TV in general, in my opinion, it feels like you usually need, at least for comedy, you usually need more than one season. I think that everybody is settling in. I know, you know, the first episode was fine. I think the episodes have gotten better over, you know, the first half of the season that I've seen so far, so I'm excited to see where it ends. But there are still a few things that I'm not quite sure of for the show going forward. The first one is this 10-episode streaming format, which I think is terrible when it comes to shows like this, because shows like The Office, 30 Rock, Parks and Rec, they were all, you know, 18, 20 episode seasons. Smushing the paper into 10 episodes, which are all longer than a typical TV sitcom. They all clock in around 27 to 30 something minutes. I don't know. I still think maybe 20-minute format of like 15 to 20 episodes would be better so that people could settle in a little bit more. But, you know, I know that this is just kind of how the streaming world works now. Everything's 8 to 10 episodes. God forbid you do 15 to 20. So I'm kind of just given up on that. It seems like if the show is renewed for season 2, I'm sure season 2 will also be 10 episodes. But I will say, with shows like The Office and Parks and Rec, they all still kind of had a central character, whether it was Leslie Knope or Liz Lemon or Michael Scott. This show right now doesn't really have that. It definitely has a lot of characters, but I don't know if they've quite figured out where they want each of them to sort of fit in, what role they want each of them to play. Obviously, Oscar Martinez is in this show as well, and he's just playing Oscar Martinez, which is a fan of The Office. Just feels like a warm hug, right? It feels like a familiar face. I think they were very smart in picking him specifically to carry over into this show. I also think Kevin could have potentially worked, but I think Oscar was a very safe pick. As far as Domhnall Gleeson's role and just sort of where everyone else fits right now, doesn't quite feel like they've figured that out. And maybe they're kind of looking to audience reactions, more so people that are enjoying the show but have, you know, constructive criticism. Because I do think it's a good show. I just think maybe the pieces aren't all where they would fit the most effectively. And, you know, I think in Domhnall's character, he might be too much of the straight man. I don't know. It's like there's little instances where he's a little bit goofier. And you don't need to be Michael Scott goofy, because Michael Scott is a very unique character that toes the line between like kind of being an asshole, but also being this very loving, caring person. I think that this character has potential to be just a little bit sillier, and they show it in bits and pieces, but it's still not quite where I think it needs to be for the comedy in this show to work as well as it could. And, again, I think some of this first season is just sort of figuring out how frequently to feature certain characters. There was a scene in one of the episodes where two of the reporters go down to a police station, run into the ex-girlfriend of one of the reporters, who has started dating a man who looks almost exactly like the guy that she dumped. And it's really funny. It's a really funny scene. I think it's sort of that Always Sunny approach of taking characters that are very goofy and putting them in a normal setting, a very serious setting like a police station. That was a really funny scene. And I think from this show, there's a potential for more of that. But again, that's sort of that line The Office walked of like how many scenes in the show are just absolutely ridiculous and how many are like actual serious, office environment, or not serious, but just not quite as goofy types of scenes. So I do think if you're a fan of The Office or 30 Rock or Parks and Rec or Modern Family, any sort of show that followed a very similar style, I think you'll like The Paper. It does sort of feel like it's finding its footing, which I think is fine for the first season of a show, because that's just sort of part of the experience. All the actors are getting used to it. But on that note, I did want to mention something that The Office did really well, and Parks and Rec and 30 Rock did the total opposite. But I do think that maybe it would have been not the worst idea to just have a couple more real people. Like The Office was famous for casting regular people in the roles of the workers, and it worked really well. Like, it made it all feel more authentic. And I have seen some comments about this show where the actors feel like actors, and in some cases it works, right? The two bosses in The Office of The Paper, the office that The Paper is in, they're really great. At least I think so, because they're very much acting for the cameras. They're excited to potentially be on television. Some of the other actors in the show do feel a little bit like, I don't know, not out of place, just kind of awkward right now, which again might be they're kind of trying to figure out where everybody fits within the context of the show. And some plot lines feel a little rushed. Like two of the characters who we literally just met are already now kind of dating, which again, gonna be almost impossible to not compare this show to The Office constantly. A show that had plenty of office romances, but especially a couple of very famous ones between Jim and Pam, Dwight, Angela, Andy, somewhere in there. It just feels like, maybe some overcorrection, right? People kind of joked on Jim and Pam being on again, off again for like 10 years. This was like 4 episodes, and I don't really care because I don't know these characters at all, really. So some of these things feel like maybe they weren't sure about getting renewed, so they were like, let's just do it all right now just in case. But then they did get renewed, and then some of this feels like it probably could have waited for season 2, because if they're gonna start an on again, off again thing, man, I don't know if I can. I mean, episode 4, geez, like I don't know if I can do, a few more years of this. I think overall, I'm enjoying the show. I think it's well done. I think that it has almost impossible task of living up to the legacy of The Office and constantly being compared to that show, because this is essentially a reboot in a different setting. They know that. They know that the show is going to be compared to The Office all the time. Every single thing they do in the show is going to be compared to something that happened in The Office. And I would think they kind of invited that when you cast someone from The Office to be in the new show. They knew these comparisons were coming. I'm excited to see how they sort of navigate it and make The Paper feel sort of like it can exist on its own without needing to be this, like, I don't know, child of a TV show like The Office. So we'll see how season 1 turns out. So far, I'm enjoying the show. I think as a viewer, I kind of have to get over my own, like, it's not The Office, and Michael Scott's not going to show up. Like, I have to get over that sort of mentality. But for what the show is doing so far, I think it's headed in the right direction. I think there's a lot of potential with this show, and I'm excited to see where it goes. And here's hoping that the end of season 1 is great, and I'm looking forward to season 2.